Hi, I'm Laura Webb. I'm a partner in our EHG group. I'm joined today with by Lise Birkendavi. I'm really excited, Lise, to chat with you today. Lise is the co-founder and managing partner of BKR Capital, incidentally becoming the first Black woman in Canada to manage an institutionally backed VC fund. BKR invests in early stage Black-led technology startups to close the funding gap and diversify the face of success. Lees is a firm believer in using the forces of capital markets as a basis for inclusive wealth creation, rather, and sustainable poverty alleviation. So, Lils, I'm really excited to chat with you today. I introduced very basically the fund, but why don't you start by giving us an overview of BKR's focus?
Thank you, Laura. And first and foremost, thank you for having me. I'm always excited to take part in any conversations with Osler. We've been working together, since the very beginning on this ambitious project. So yeah, it's always nice to be able to share some of the thoughts that we have on the sector and on the space with such a great partner. So about BKR, we are, as you mentioned, a venture capital fund based out of Toronto who is focused on investing in Black-led tech companies in Canada. The reason why we started in this space is because, both myself and my co-founder have seen the massive gap that exists in the ecosystem. We're in a country where we have a beautiful quality of education. We have innovators from all walks of life and all backgrounds who are building solutions for our ecosystem at large. But you have this gap in the investment landscape. We started issuing reports, and just last year, it's 0.15% of the funding that goes to Black-led companies. So it's for us, it's textbook arbitrage. It's purpose driven, yes, but it's textbook arbitrage. Like, we're going to go and get those gems in the ecosystem that are building to solve local problems that are thinking globally from day one. And as you mentioned, when we raised our first fund in 2021, we became a historical fund. It was the first time in Canada that it was a Black-led VC fund that was managing institutional dollars. Right now, we're raising our second fund, but we're also building the ecosystem so that there's more inclusivity in general, so that there's no more of that missed opportunity. We can have a bit more of contributions from people with different walks of life and perspective, and that's contributing to solving our country's biggest challenges.
And so are there particular sectors or stages of company growth where you see the strongest potential? Because of course you have your investment thesis, but you're sort of industry agnostic in that sense. So what are you excited about?
So yes, we are sector agnostic. We invest early. So early stage, pre-seed, seed, and it's strategically, opportunistically, Series A. We are excited, like everyone. We're looking at the impact of AI in different spaces, but what's really exciting to us is basically having an understanding of how the technologies that are built today are impacting the future of work and the future of living, with a bit of that inclusive sort of horizontal to it. So everything around the future of work. We love prop tech as well, fintech. We've been investing in health tech companies that are looking at basically how do you provide healthcare differently, especially when we're seeing the changes of the demographics right now in North America. So we're really having this future looking in different sectors. And obviously, when we invest, we have to make sure that we can add value. So we have to look at our surrounding, our network, ourselves, our experience, and make sure that we're the right partner. We're more than just capital. It's about being there strategically for the founders. But with the emergence of AI everywhere, having an understanding of how it better impacts workflow, how it also just helps teams increase their runway. Like, how are people using it more efficiently? Who's being smart about how AI is empowering their company? So that's something we're having a closer look at, both for portfolio companies, but also internally at BKR.
And you're not just investing in Canada, you are also investing in companies that are based around the world. So what does that look like right now?
So we have a small allocation for international companies. For Fund 1 was 10%, Fund 2 it's 20. We keep that Canadian link strong. So more often than not, it's Canadian founders who decided to relocate, especially sometimes because of the lack of capital that you find in our ecosystem, especially for underrepresented founders. And What has been really, really interesting, so we're mainly focused in the US in terms of registration, but we love the unfair advantage that our founders have in understanding, certain ecosystems that are potentially less represented in Canadian portfolios. So we have a lot of innovations that are touching either the Caribbean region or the African continent, especially in the fintech space, which has been quite interesting. So we've been looking at the evolution of that quite a bit.
Yeah. And what I love about, you said it earlier, you're not just providing capital, you're providing sort of, strategic resources. And so beyond capital, what are those resources and support that you're providing to your companies? And sort of how do you help companies navigate the challenges of scaling domestically and sort of, internationally as well?
So it's interesting. It's several ways, right? So we're doing it through our network. So we happen all of the partners have extensive networks in many geographies. So when a founder starts to think about expanding to XYZ country or in the XYZ space, we often know directly someone or have or at 2 degrees of separation with a potential partner, just somebody to be that can give them additional intelligence or help them actually get to that level. We do it through fundraising support. I think that already being, this fund that's not afraid to lead. We also have a good network in the venture capital space, and one of the ways we measure success is the leverage. For each $1 that we're putting in a company, how many more dollars are we able to basically attract in that same company? So we're really like this partner for growth from that specific purpose, and we see so many deals. It's being sector agnostic has its weaknesses, but also its strength in the number of deals that we can see. So we are able to provide with strategic insight from what's happening in the market, and we take board seats. Governance for us is very, very important. But we're there with founders, basically like looking at the problems together when they need it. We never impose ourselves, but we're making sure that if they need to speak on a Saturday morning to talk about something, more often than not, we're available to basically go through what's the problem, how to basically unpack it and yeah, and find solutions with them where we see ourselves as partners for growth.
Yeah. Yeah, and building a company is not, it's not a 9 to 5 gig. And neither is building a fund and running a management company. So we recently worked together to complete the successful closing, your first closing for Fund Two. Congratulations, a big milestone. How, having had the experience from Fund One and now, on to Fund Two, how have you seen the venture capital ecosystem evolve in Canada in the last year? Maybe sort of what are the trends and developments in technology or regulation or founder talent that you think are going to be sort of significant influencers and drivers in the next, two years?
So there's a few things that I believe will impact the ecosystem quite a bit. Regardless of our own space, I think that generally in Canada, access to capital is tighter. So because of the current, macroeconomic shifts, everybody is more risk averse. So there's a stronger looks at like current unit economics pathways to profitability, which means that a company that is on the VC track that has raised, usually there was a certain timeline before they were expecting to raise again. That timeline has doubled or tripled. So you have to be able to be extremely capital efficient. That's where some of the technological advances that everybody's talking about are helpful. We talked about it a bit earlier, but AI helps in improving efficiency in different areas. One of the shifts that I think will impact many companies, and I think especially companies in our investable asset base, is the changes of regulations in immigration. Because in the past years, we had a lot of qualified new immigrant that basically were coming to the country and really hungry, in terms of making their mark and then supporting beautiful projects. So we know a lot of our founders have a lot of them were newcomers not that long ago, or had have a lot of them as part of members of their team. I think that talent base will probably decrease, which is something to look out for, even like, amongst international students too. I was, not too long ago in St. John's as well, talking with other funds, and a lot of them were hiring, in Newfoundland, looking at the new immigrant based as well, because you have a lot of talent that were coming from outside, and this will decrease quite a bit. So it's going to be interesting to see how people manage from that perspective. Um, and so, yeah, so those are some of the shifts that we're keeping an eye on. We're keeping an eye also on the different relationship between countries. We're helping our portfolio companies right now really focus on high growth countries. Like we're seeing the relationship with our neighbor from the south is just like shifting all the way. Lots of it's hard to predict, it's hard to plan. So now I'm basically starting to look in other directions to make sure that we create this robustness and just more resilience, within the companies that we have invested in, and even supporting others in the ecosystem also at looking at growth globally differently.
Yeah, and resilience, I like that you use that word because that I think is a key theme sort of throughout the ecosystem currently and over the past few years. Maybe just to end us off, is there something that you're particularly excited about?
I am, because I'm excited about, to be honest, the time that we are in right now. It might seem, weird to say, but the fact that there is so much shift, I think that right now is the best place to position ourselves, either as a fund or as a company in any space in a decisive way, with basically the way the world order is shifting, if that makes sense. So if
Yeah.
you're basically a company that's looking at growing internationally and sort of understanding the different dynamics while everybody's sort of waiting and watching, now it's time to create trust, to build the right partnerships, to build strong products, to build lean, being super capital efficient. And I think that a lot of the winners that we will see in the next 3 years would have been born, in 2025, 2026.
Yeah, taking the shift as an opportunity.
Exactly.
Well, please, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to collaborate. Thank you for chatting with me today and sharing some of your insights. Um, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.